All right, so final video in the pilot section, and in this one we're talking about vision and purpose. Now this might seem a little bit too abstract, and I always kind of used to think that people would say, oh, what's your vision? What's your purpose in this world? And I used to be like, look man, come on, I'm just focused on getting through one day to the next. But I've got to admit, recently I've started to think a lot more about vision and purpose. Because in a way, the pilot is not just responsible for setting the things that we're doing for a given day. The pilot is also generally responsible for making sure that the productivity that we're doing is generally useful over time. And because, going back to our equation, productivity equals useful output divided by time multiplied by F, we want to make sure it's useful. And so we want to make sure the stuff that we're doing is actually in line with some kind of wider vision. And I think often one of the reasons why we are unproductive is because we don't see the bigger picture. Like, it's really hard to convince like a 12-year-old secondary school student that, mate, you've got to do your homework. And I was like, why? Because it'll help you get better grades. Why does that matter? Because then you'll get to a better university. Why does that matter? Because then you'll get a better job. Why does that matter? Because then you'll be happier. The causality starts to really break down the further along that spectrum that you go. And so at some point we do want to be thinking about what is a wider vision? What's a wider purpose? Where do we get the meaning in life? Obviously, this is the $1 million question. People have tried answering it over the years. There's a very good book by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was imprisoned in a concentration camp for a long time. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about, how people found meaning in the most trying of circumstances. And essentially, my understanding of his thesis is that he says that a lot of meaning comes from having responsibility towards something that's greater than ourselves. So apparently, parents get meaning from their children because the children are like a responsibility that they have to do. People get a sense of meaning by being part of their local church or by setting up a business or by kind of being recognized for having responsibility at work. There's all sorts of different sources of meaning in our life. So that's one way of thinking about the question. The other interesting way of thinking about this question is something called the Odyssey Plan. This is apparently an exercise that they give to Stanford Business School students. I discovered this from a video on my friend Unjaded Jade's YouTube channel. And I did this exercise and it really kind of sort of changed the way that I was thinking about my life. So the idea of the Odyssey Plan is that you ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is, in 5 years' time, what would my life look like if I continued down exactly the same path? And you would kind of write in detail, kind of this day, 5 years from now, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? Who's in your life? What are you doing in your life? That sort of thing. And after you've written kind of a few paragraphs about that, the next question is, now imagine in 5 years' time, what would your life look like if you took a completely different path? And write down in detail what that might look like. And then the final question in the Odyssey Plan is, in 5 years' time, what would your life look like if money was no object and if societal expectations didn't matter at all? And then you write down what kind of your life looks like then. And that was an interesting exercise for me because it made me realize that the path that I was on when I did the exercise, which was like December 2019, it made me kind of realize that the path that I was on led to a point where at the end of it, I was kind of like, is this it? I imagined myself continuing to live in Cambridge and continuing to work part-time in medicine as an anesthetics trainee, anesthetics registrar, doing teaching on the side. And I kind of just had a sense of, it just didn't seem particularly exciting. Kind of without questioning that before, for the last few years, I just kind of assumed that would be where my life would go, that I would end up living in Cambridge forever and, supervising at a college and that kind of stuff. But it was only doing this exercise that made me realize that maybe this isn't quite the vision and purpose that I want for my life. So I don't know, it might sound a little bit wishy-washy, might sound a bit abstract, but I think it's very interesting. Every single person I know who has actually tried the Odyssey Plan exercise has found it to be eye-opening in some way or another. So that's another way of answering the question of vision and purpose. Another way is by doing the deathbed exercise, which is where you ask yourself, let's say I were to die 1 year from now, how would I change? What would I do differently? Then you ask yourself, what if I were to die 2 years from now? What if I were to die 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I'm not a huge fan of the 1 year from now because the 1 year from now makes us focus on very short-term thinking. But I like thinking about it in terms of 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years because I think I'm 26 right now. If I were to die at the age of 28, then, okay, interesting. I probably wouldn't just piss away the next 2 years. I'd probably want to do something somewhat productive, but that would give me some kind of idea as to what I want my wider mission or purpose in life to actually be. Because otherwise, thinking about it in too long a time horizon makes it really hard to actually think about. So I quite like the 2 year variety of that question. A fourth way of thinking about this, people have tried to answer this question over the years, and I find that the more the more frames we have for answering it, the easier it becomes to actually think about. Another way of thinking about it is by splitting life up into the only bits that matter. And I think those are like 4 things. That's physical health, number 1. Number 2, mental health / happiness / fulfillment as like a bucket. Number 3, relationships. And number 4, money, material stuff, making sure we have food, making sure we have a house, like a roof over our heads, that kind of stuff. And so if we think about those 4 domains, one way of thinking about the mission purpose in life is to kind of optimize for those 4 and think, okay, how do I make sure that I'm kind of 100% on all those four domains: physical health, mental health, relationships, and material stuff. And then once you've got that sorted, at that point, you can start thinking even harder. And so for me, ever since I first read The 4-Hour Workweek, when I would think I was 17 years old, my guiding principle, my guiding North Star, my guiding vision purpose has always been this idea of creating multiple streams of passive income with the ultimate goal of work being optional. And, by the grace of God, I'm now at the point where work is optional and I don't have to go to work if I don't want to. And that's like a really nice position to be. But it's also the North Star that I've been chasing for the last 9 years of my life. And so now I'm at that point. The next question I have to think is, okay, damn, continuing to chase more sources of passive income probably isn't the path to leading a happy and meaningful and productive life. I now have to start thinking a lot more about what do I actually want to achieve? What value do I want to add to the world? What do I want to get done? Still haven't figured it out. It's a lifelong ongoing endeavor. But given that productivity is about useful output over time, and given that in 10% of the time we are actually being the pilot, i.e. setting the course for our lives and for the day, I think it is important that we occasionally take a step back and think, what is all of this in service of? What is the point of being productive? What is the point of studying for our exams? What is the point of trying to go to the gym? What are we actually optimizing for? What is the game that we're playing, and what are the victory conditions of that game? So just a few thoughts there. Haven't figured it out. Don't think anyone really has, but hopefully that's kind of helpful. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.